Hello and welcome. Today we're going to paint this portrait in oils, and we'll start by preparing the canvas, do the actual painting, and ultimately we're going to varnish it. I'm Andy, and on this channel I share my oil painting journey. Without any further ado, let's get started. For this portrait, I made the drawing in advance, and now I have to transfer it to the canvas. I saw Julie Beck on Instagram use this method, and I really wanted to try this out. In case you don't speak Dutch, this is baking paper, and this paper is gonna serve as our printing press. And by the way, we are working on a linen panel. It's really small, it's 24 by 30 centimeters or 9.5 by 11.8 inches. It's an oil primed surface, but I think it only has one coat because it's still very absorbent. Now we're going to use some burnt umber and spread it across the paper. What makes this paper so cool is that it doesn't absorb all the oil, so all the paint stays on top. And all it's left to do is wipe it off with a paper towel and put it underneath the drawing. Make sure that the painted side is facing the canvas and not your copy. And I'm using some masking tape to just secure it at the bottom so that it doesn't move too much. And now all you have to do is go over your line work. They don't have to be the best lines imaginable, best quality lines, but they do have to be drawn with enough pressure so that it transfers. But don't worry, actually you don't have to push that hard. As you can see, everything's transferred now, and all that's left to do is wipe it clean, wipe off the excess oil, and this is the result. Now we can finally start the painting itself, although this is all still preliminary work, and I'm doing this with turpentine to thin out the paint so that the layer is thin and you can still see the lines beneath. I'm doing this to get rid of white because when you paint on a white surface, that paint is going to appear very dark, and in the end you might end up with a painting that's actually not dark enough once everything is covered. Now I dropped the turpentine and I'm gonna block in the face. However, there's this little problem. The eyes are way too low in the original drawing. So this is actually a rescue operation, and I have a perfect excuse for that. I was just in such a hurry to create a new painting and a new video that I somewhat overlooked this little detail. For this part of the painting, I'm using a lot of opaque paints like titanium white, ivory black, and cadmium orange, so it's no problem to cover the line work that was underneath this eye previously. Now, although this is an absorbent surface and I'm using opaque paints, I'm starting to notice that the paint lifts off easily. It's sliding about and blending is kind of difficult. So I'm like, okay, you know what, I'll just do the best I can, and then I'll come back to this again in another layer. Now I've started working on the other side of the face, which is mostly in shadow. So the pigments are gonna change a little bit. I'm still using the cadmium orange, which is very opaque, but I'm also adding semi-transparent Van Dyck brown. Oh, by the way, most of this footage is sped up by a factor of 2, so this is not my actual painting speed. At this point I was wondering, should I just paint the head in its entirety and then add the jewelry later, or am I gonna paint around it? And for some reason I just painted around it. And don't ask me why, because I don't know. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Now that the eyes are where they belong, I'm gonna continue to block in the face. And even though there is an underpainting already, I'm considering this another underpainting. But this time it's a little more robust, so that the next layer will actually stick properly and I can blend properly, and then I can do it for real. I'm not using any medium now, I'm just using paint as it comes out of the tube. And look at that forehead, by the way. Look how much oil has been absorbed. It's completely dull. Oh, and now the forehead is back to normal because I oiled it out with some safflower oil. Now that I have covered all the dark areas of the face, I'm switching to the lighter side. I think that's a pretty good workflow, just to work from dark to light, and then when it's dry and the time has come to scumble in other layers or a light layer, it's then a good idea to switch it up and work from light to dark. Looking back at it now, there is hardly a difference between light and dark at this point. But that will be fixed later on. I still had paint on the palette and I still had some energy left for that day, and that's why I started blocking in the top of the hat. Well, it's not really a hat, you know, the top of the garment. Before I block in anything else, I want to go over the face again, and this is actually the proper painting layer. So we're working on a solid underpainting, and now the fun can begin. And there's actually also no point in blocking in the rest if the face doesn't turn out to be great, because, you know, that's the essence of a portrait painting. It's all about the face. So I just want to have a decent result before I continue working on the rest. Although it's not really the face that caught my attention when I looked at the reference photo, it's more the cloth, and actually I'm gonna have a lot more fun painting cloth than I do or did this face. By the way, I hope I'm making myself clear with this voiceover. It's not really my thing, but I'm trying. And it just reminds me that I saw this vlog, this presentation, and it was entirely made with AI, so it looked, you know, just like a regular person, different camera angles, you know, intonation, the voice, everything was almost human. So probably by this time next year, one could just prompt this entire video. By the way, how are you liking that B-roll? It's all footage from my hometown, so one day I just dressed up a bit and strolled around town filming idyllic scenes, just so I could have some nice B-roll for this video. Now we are revisiting the cheek area, and we've been here twice already, I know, but now it's for real. And now we have to paint a lot of subtleties, in the face. So next to the nose we have that cheek coming up from the smile. So we have slight subtle transitions there. In other words, the values there are really compressed, so the difference between the dark is dark and the light is light in the shadow area is minimal. They're really close together. To be honest, the mouth part is probably my least favorite part of this painting, because I didn't really capture the likeness. Well, in general, I didn't really capture her likeness, but the mouth is really a bit of a low effort here. But it's okay, I consider this a practice piece, and after this project I'm gonna have to take some time and sort of rethink where I want to go with this whole art thing and this art style, because I'm thinking about getting into bigger paintings and, you know, making real compositions and not just basically copying photos. Oh, and by the way, we've entered the new phase of the painting, so right now I'm creating what I did before, creating a second underpainting, which is a bit more robust than the flimsy first layer. And for this I'm adding turpentine, and I'm also using a very old brush. I mean, not that old, but it's old, because I don't want to damage my new Rosemary & Co brushes. This is sped up by a factor of, I think, 10,000%, so it's 100 times faster than the normal painting speed. So don't get depressed if you see me painting this fast, because I'm cheating. For the background, I'm switching to a broader brush, which is also a very old brush. And it's not that soft anymore, so it's supposed to be a soft synthetic, but it's quite hard and it leaves behind a lot of marks. To be honest, if this is 100 times the speed, I'm pretty slow. Maybe it's just 10 times the speed, you know. Gotta save some face here. All these little shapes, they really take up a lot of time to paint. And I keep underestimating it. Like, especially on the other side, on the light side next to the eye. That took a lot of time, but you'll see that later. And by the way, at this stage, I decided to use the Liquin original from Winsor & Newton. So this medium just speeds up the drying time and gives a bit of a glossy finish, and also makes the paint a bit more slick. Speaking of shapes, the other day I was watching a tutorial or a presentation about Frank Frazetta's style and what made it work, and there was an entire chapter about the shape language, especially of the shadows. And I think that's partly why this picture got my attention, because there's this clear silhouette, it has asymmetrical shapes, they are linked, there's variety in them, there's simple and complex shapes and so forth. Anyway, doesn't really totally apply to this, but still a little bit. Now this part of the cloth is one big continuous piece, but it helps to just divide it up in several mini shapes, and so it's a bit more manageable. I'm keeping into account that I will add another layer on top of this one that is a bit brighter, so I'm not gonna go all the way to the highest value right now. I'm just gonna cover the surface and then later come back and paint the light on top of it, especially coming from the right side, obviously. Throughout most of the painting I'm using soft pointed rounds, synthetic brushes by Vinci, the NOVA series, just like in the previous painting. I'm just slowly carving out the shapes, looking at the reference all the time and looking back and comparing shapes and sizes and values and hue shifts. That's basically all painting is, really. I'm a value, hue shifting, shapes and size checking guy. That was nice. Gotta love that filler music, so I don't have to talk. How other creators do it is still a mystery to me, you know. They can talk about this process forever. I mean, maybe I've been doing this for too long, and some things that are so obvious to me are not obvious at all to anyone who starts with the painting process. So that's why I kind of skip things. And I mean, I'm still a beginner at this too, you know. I've only been painting about 2 years now, but I forget, like, oh no, that's not true. I've been painting, you know, for 8 years before that, when I was just doing digital work. The process is so similar that I sort of not point out the obvious things. I mean, things that are obvious to me, but not obvious to a total beginner, so. And I've probably said this before in other videos. By the way, look at that sunken in area on the left side. Her entire face is just, dry. Just like before. But now it's not only the forehead, it's also, well, basically all of the face. So as soon as I have covered an area again with paint, then I go back in and I go in with a lighter value and just blend that in there. And sometimes I blend it in too much and then the brighter value becomes less bright, but it blends nicely into the previous mixture. And that's why we have another pass at it later on, where we paint more light into it. And that's actually the most fun part, the detail work. The only pitfall there is that you might be running out of steam at that point. You want to move on, or at least I do. And then, well, I don't really have the energy to spend that much time on details. And details are really what makes the painting come alive. So the more of those, you know, highlights you put in there, more details in the light areas, the more the painting's gonna pop. And that last 5% really makes the difference, I think, between good work and great work. Now that we've covered the face and the clothes, it's time to put another layer on the background. And now I'm adding some Liquin original from Winsor & Newton, and it needs a little bit more from Van Dyck brown and a little bit more cadmium orange. And as you can see, I made it more yellow and less orange. Oh, and by the way, the basis for this was cadmium yellow and yellow ochre. Now I'm using an old piece of sponge and I'm oiling out the area where I'm gonna working today. Side note, it's not oil that I'm using to oil it out, it's also just Liquin original. I saw, I believe, Andrew Tischler do this, so I thought, why the hell not? I'm going back into the shadow area to add a few more darker tones, especially near the eyes. And because it was lacking a bit of form, so now there's a more of a distinction between the left sides. Then we have the cheek, which is a bit darker, and it rounds up to a lighter side beneath the eye. Here I messed up a bit, so I'm using a Q-tip to remove the excess paint, and then I can just go over it again later. And apparently I was still not happy with the pupil, so I went over it again for the third time, not counting the first time, which was the flimsy layer where the eye was still in the wrong place. Oh, by the way, now we are working in real time speed, so it's not the double speed like I had been using throughout this entire video. Okay, scratch that, we're back to, well, double speed I suppose. This piece of jewelry kind of threw me off because it's not symmetrical, it's not even, so some parts are thick, other parts are thin, and so I hope that's clear enough. I hope nobody goes like, hey man, this is not symmetrical, what did you do here? See, now I'm working from light to dark instead of dark to light. Jesus, oh man. So the workflow for this is oil it in, apply the paint, and then blend it out with a bristle brush. I think I should get an assistant, you know, just someone that brings the painting to this point where you can have the most fun, and you know, all the shitty work is for the other guy. Let's not forget to paint the reflected light within the folds. When I look at it now, I should have blended a bit less, so every time I apply a new layer of light, as I mentioned before, I blend it out a bit too much, so that tones down the brightness, and you end up with something that's not that entirely different from the painting as it was before. Of course, no one's stopping you to paint another layer on top of this, but in this case, I did not do that. Wow, is this really day 14? I didn't even get paid for this. But if you want to support me, you can always subscribe to the channel, leave a like and a comment, or follow me on Instagram and such, links below. The contrast between the shadow areas and the lighter areas isn't that big in this section, so I'm going over these darker values. That's also because this piece of cloth lets through a lot of light, so there's a lot of subsurface scattering, and that's what makes this piece of cloth come to life, really. So what happens is the light penetrates the fabric, and inside the fabric it starts bouncing around before it reflects the light back outside. So that's the subsurface scattering, right? And in addition, that area where light meets dark, so where that transition is between light and dark, there's a intenser hue due to the several factors. But anyway, in that area, the transitory area, the local color is going to be more intense before it falls off again into the shadow. For example, here and here. And it's really up to you how intense you make this. I tend to keep it a little bit subtle here, I mean, especially in this painting. But if you really exaggerate, then your painting will look a lot more lively, in my opinion. Another interesting thing happening here is the use of simultaneous contrast. So, for example, I could paint with orange strokes, and once we go more to the neutral side, so the orange becomes more gray and gray, that gray will appear its complementary color. So the complementary color of orange is blue. So the gray will appear blue, even though it's still in the orange range. The time has finally come to put a layer of retouch varnish on this, and what this does is it will protect the painting while it dries so that next year I can put on the final varnish, but also in the meantime it brings back the colors and the contrast, and your painting is gonna look like you intended it to look like. Now I waited for 2 weeks, but you can probably do it earlier. I was just worried that the paint would lift off because earlier in the process when I was oiling out, a lot of paint came off, and yeah, so I was worried that would happen again, but in the end it didn't. And here's a before and after shot. And so we have come to the end of this painting video. If you're still here, thank you so much for sticking with me. I hope this video was somewhat entertaining or educational, and if you found some value in it, please leave me a comment or a like, or well, most importantly, just subscribe to the channel. That would be awesome. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.